Hello everyone, I'm Colin Morris and I head up Nasstar's legal business development and strategy team. Prior to joining Nasstar, I was previously head of IT at Linklaters, and since leaving the firm, I've been responsible for the IT strategy of many law firms and barrister chambers over the years that followed. Now there's a saying that hindsight is a wonderful thing, which sort of implies that an opportunity has been missed. As well, people often speak of the benefit of hindsight, meaning that they would have acted differently in the past if only they'd have known what they know now. Again, implying an opportunity has been missed. Now, just hold that thought for a moment and consider how law firms reacted to the pandemic. Faced with a case of having to make changes to working practices literally overnight simply to survive, virtually all strategic thinking went out the window. But now, with the heat off, with a chance to catch our breath, I believe this is the right time for firms to grab hindsight by the scruff of its neck and use it to craft their future IT strategy using every scrap of the lessons learned over these past 15 or 16 months. If we can, let's truly make hindsight a wonderful thing, as the saying goes. Okay. So, the objective today is to give you some food for thought in terms of what those lessons might be, highlighting some of the more important considerations that firms should perhaps have in mind as they start to shape their own law firm of the future. I'm going to cover the ground today under these four headings. I'm not suggesting these are the only four headings, but they're the four headings I'm going to focus on. So let's just take those in order. So I've put cybersecurity as the #1 consideration. Client service is clearly, and I'll explain why cybersecurity is #1 in a moment, but client service is obviously second to none other than security, of course. I'm then going to talk about artificial intelligence and finally look at collaborative working, both internally and with clients. Now, in terms of cybersecurity, any discussion on the subject of how a law firm's cybersecurity should be must bear in mind the fact that law firms are under constant threat of attack. Every firm's defences will be breached. I say they're commonplace, but it's really a case of when and not if a firm's defences will be breached. They're that common these days. The criminals are improving all the time off the back of growing profits that are growing exponentially. Firms have, greatly extended the network perimeter and therefore offered the criminals an increased opportunities as a result of COVID and the need for home working. Because of all of those things, as far as security is concerned, firms really do need to up their game. Let's just look at each of these points in more detail. Firstly, law firms are an increasingly prime target for the criminals who see firms as being weak, easy opportunity with high value assets. As a general rule, firms underspend on their defences, certainly by comparison to, say, banks and other businesses that deal with high value assets. By contrast, as I say, the criminals are happily reinvesting an element of their growing profits to make their weaponry even more powerful. Speaking with security experts, the type of people who spend their lives monitoring criminal activity, they tell me that most attacks are carried out by state-backed entities and arguably state-funded entities whose employees arrive for work each morning at 9 o'clock. They look just like any other white-collar worker. They work in nice, clean office blocks equipped with staff canteens and rest areas, etc. They take a 1-hour lunch break, clock off at 5:30 and go home. And then they come back the next day and do it all over again. They do all they can to break through defences. They view what they do as a regular bona fide job. Indeed, they're proud of what they're doing, and they certainly don't consider their efforts as being wrong in any way. It is incredibly, very, very scary stuff. If anyone fancies a career change, you can easily pick up the necessary tools to become a cyber criminal yourself. Just grab a franchise on the dark web. Everything you need, no upfront investment. Just share your profits with the parent company, and you're away. You must be under no illusion that the bad guys are coming for us. And next, and this is just human nature. Obviously, every managing partner hopes that it's not their firm that suffers a breach. Let it be the firm next door, but please don't let it be us. However, in fact, the premise really should be that it will happen to every firm at some point. It's ours included, or yours included, and fronting up to the risks should encourage firms to do everything possible to avoid it happening. And then, if it does happen, everything to contain that breach. Containment's just as important as avoiding it. Another important point to bear in mind here is that no matter what we do in terms of making our defences as sophisticated and as bulletproof as possible, the fact of the matter is that most breaches are caused not by human failings, not by system failings rather, but by human failings. Some 95%, I think, is the figure quoted. 95% or more breaches occur when a user clicks on a link in an email and gets duped into giving away their credentials. And it'll be the most harmless looking, realistic and convincing email that does the trick. All the hard work undone by one simple human error. And yes, criminals are definitely getting smarter. In years gone by, the criminals hoped to gain access to systems to do a bit of digging, perhaps see what they could find or cause some embarrassment, etc. Maybe trick a firm into sending money to a bogus account rather than the target account, etc., etc. But that's no longer the case these days. Really, all they want to do is to find a way in, take control, encrypt the data, and extort money in return for the key to unlock it. As a result, the criminals' profits are rocketing. For example, the Grand Crab ransomware attack alone made criminals over $2 billion in just 2 years, and that's just one attack among many. The stakes here are really very, very high. Now, against this background, along came COVID, and the criminals rubbed their hands together with delight because, without giving it much, if indeed any strategic thought whatsoever, and despite the obvious risks, firms open themselves up to becoming an even easier target by allowing people to work from home using networks that are inherently weak. So now, resident on the same network as a firm's valuable client assets are street doorbells and baby monitors, televisions, fridges, etc. Lovely, less secure access points for the criminals to exploit. We just let this happen overnight. We had to. So as I say, firms need to up their game. And my point here is this: whilst accepting that faced with COVID, firms just did what they had to do, surely now is the time to put that right. Surely firms should be looking hard at the whole spectrum of their security arrangements to ensure the right levels of protection are set in place. Increased investment in system security is a must in the law firm of the future. So what does that mean? What the firms need to invest in? Well, to begin with, let's do all we can to try and deny the criminals access to the network. Strengthening defences has got to be a must. We need to make sure that firewalls on the next generation level, such as Fortinet, Palo, Firepower and the like, and they need to be fully patched with processes in place to make sure that patching is maintained on an ongoing basis. Antivirus software needs to be kept up to date with no gaps anywhere on the now extended network. And I mean the extended network. We need to consider bringing EDR software into place. EDR, by the way, stands for Endpoint Detection and Response. And products such as FireEye, CrowdStrike, Microsoft ATP can watch for anything out of the ordinary and take real-time evasive action to deter and contain an attack. Take an interest in home routers. Which magazine reported in May of this year that 6 million people are using devices that have not been patched since 2018, which is amazing. Which magazine also analysed 13 router devices from the likes of EE, Sky and Virgin, etc. And they found that most had security flaws. Just as an aside, by contrast, all the devices supplied by BT and PlusNet passed all security tests. Just shows you the variance you can get in these devices. But regardless of the device itself, the research also found that most home routers had very weak default passwords. As I say, this should now be an area of interest for firms. You mustn't let the criminals in via the back door. Firms also need to think about what end users are allowed to do. Access to certain services and servers may need to be denied. I think in the past we were, we were quite happy to sort of allow people to have access to everything, but restrictions may need to be put in place for sites that have no business relevance, for example. Advertisements may need to be blocked. And there's software there out there, such as 40CM, that can monitor the network for signs of malicious activity or compromise and shut down services to contain an attack. These types of things should also be considered. I think as well, firms also need to look at their basic IT infrastructure in the light of COVID, the servers and storage devices in use. And I think now, these days, any argument surrounding on-premise versus cloud-based computing techniques has to be pretty much past debate. Essentially, whether a firm outsources its IT or keeps its IT in-house, it should have a plan in place to move all on-premise servers to the cloud. Every on-premise server represents a weakness, something easier for the criminals to gain access to. I recognise that we haven't got time in this session to discuss these issues in great detail, and I haven't even mentioned important aspects of security, such as backups and ensuring there is an air gap between backup data and live data. By that I mean, often the criminals break into the network, and not that they don't only get hold of the live data, but backup data is kept in the kept available and can be compromised. Here at Nasstar, when we're asked to audit a firm's IT, we often find that this isn't the case, meaning the criminals can not only encrypt the live data, but also encrypt the backups. And that denies, thus denying the opportunity to restore a version of the data that hasn't been infected. Indeed, still on the subject of backups, what we generally recommend here at Nasstar is a Sky Plus style backup approach, complemented by the right detection software, so that when a breach does occur, not only is it contained, but you can also then wind back and restore to a point in time immediately before the breach occurred. Because the criminals are upping their game all the time, firms need to react proportionally. I think that's the message. Increasing security levels, acknowledging and defending the extended homework will cost money, but it's money well spent. As an example, the recent ransomware attack on the United States fuel pipeline system by the supposed Russian-backed dark side criminals was attributed to COVID and the weakness of the extended network caused by home working in the face of pandemic. If people weren't working from home, they wouldn't have broken through the defences. From my perspective, if I was still a law firm IT director, right now I'd be asking an outside agency with the right credentials to conduct a full review of all aspects of my firm's security. I'd want a report on the managing partner's desk very soon, detailing the results and recommendations. Of course, here at Nasstar, we'd be very happy to assist firms in this regard. Just contact me and I'll put you in contact with our security experts. But whether via Nasstar or an alternative company, I'd urge all firms to get that review underway. Get fresh eyes to take a look at your environment and react accordingly. Don't take anything for granted. Finally, before we leave the subject of security, there is the small matter of the biggest weakness of all, which is, as I said, the root cause of 95% of successful attacks, and that's the one of human failure. As I say, nearly all successful attacks can be tracked back to someone clicking on a link in an email and inadvertently giving their credentials away. Unfortunately, it's unreasonable to expect to completely stop people being duped in this way, and particularly whilst we rely so heavily on IDs and passwords. We really do need something more secure than IDs and passwords to control access going forward, but that's another matter. And for now, what we can do is make a greater effort to educate people, make staff more aware of the dangers, test people with phishing campaigns, train them in what to look out for, find the weak spots and try to help people overcome them. Again, this is something we can help with here at Nasstar, but as I say, whether it's via us or another company, get an action plan in place and deal with things. So when we look at the features of the law firm of the future, what I'm saying here is that increased levels of security and increased expenditure on security is paramount. I've probably spent enough time talking about security, and I did make it number one for a very good reason. I think it is top of the agenda. But let's move on and look at client service. So what I'm looking at here is we have to ignore the actual provision of legal services. Let's just accept that all firms are proficient and capable in their core function of providing legal services. Let's make this about not what firms do, but how they go about doing it. So here's a generic statement for you. The winning law firm of the future will be one that best uses technologies to improve the way it delivers client service. Technology is never going to replace the lawyer. This isn't about becoming robots. It's about the marriage of technology and the human touch in order to provide better, more efficient services. Efficiency will make a firm both more competitive by lowering the cost and lead to higher profits by sharing the value of efficiencies with the client. So the key word in all of that is efficiency. How can firms set about becoming more efficient? What elements of technology can lead the way? Again, we don't have time in this session to deal with everything in detail. It deserves more than that, but here's a starter. So I'm going to look at it from a perspective of data to begin with. And generally, it's within the practice management system that a firm's core data resides. And again, generally, it's only when changing the practice management system that a firm tends to conduct a truly extensive review of the data it holds. Given that firms only change the data, their PMS every 15 or 20 years or so on average, there's generally an average of 15 or 20 years or even more worth of data being held in that PMS system. Worse still, in my experience, most of the data within a firm's PMS tends to be in a decrepit state, with clients and contacts created multiple times and with data, names, addresses, telephone numbers, etc., being massively out of date. In order to become efficient, and quite aside from maintaining GDPR compliance, a whole nother matter, it makes very good sense for every firm to take a step back and think about what that means. Even if a firm has no intention of replacing its PMS in the near future, it might make sense to put a project in place to create a new instance of the existing PMS database with less but more accurate data, ditching anything that's been closed, say more than 3 or 5 years ago, or whatever it might be. Go through a deduplication process. Most PMS providers will have tools that will aid you in this, and put a process in place to just keep things updated going forward. Try and aim to make the data valuable, accurate and vibrant. There's an argument that in light of the pandemic and its potential impact on working practices and business requirements, that it makes sense for all firms to review the PMS market and make sure that they're well placed as far as that's concerned moving forward in this new normal we find ourselves. After all, it costs almost nothing to carry out such a review. But even leaving that argument aside, the key thing here is to get the data in as good a shape as possible. Why is that key? Well, how can a firm expect to deliver excellent client services when its core data is fundamentally flawed and out of date? How can a firm build an effective business development strategy based on such flawed data? How can a firm hope to know its client or the value of its clients when the client has been incepted 8 times over? Each time with slightly different details. And finally, just consider the wasted time on the part of the fee earner when incepting a new matter. If a search reveals 6 or 8 possible clients, each with similar but slightly different details, which of the 8 should, or 6 or 8 should the matter be linked to? The likelihood is that the fee earner would just create a 7th or a 9th instance or whatever, just be on the safe side. I'll just create it again. Every such search going forward in that sort of world is going to be an inefficiency, and God forbid a subject access request is received, or worse still, requests for anonymization. I'm focusing here on the PMS, but if a firm's case management system or other systems are not drawing on the same core data, then the issue applies equally to those systems too. Bottom line, for too long, firms have just accepted that the data they hold is decrepit, and that is something that the winning law firm of the future will need to address. It's not going to be acceptable. So that's my sort of take on the importance of data. Moving on to the next stage of efficiencies, which is workflows. Speaking about case management systems actually leads me onto the subject, because workflows are recognised as a way of increasing efficiencies and can be applied to almost all matter types in any workflow. I accept that it's the low value, high transaction style work types that represent the low hanging fruit here, but the successful law firm of the future will be one that reaches beyond those to the high value matters where there are potentially bigger benefits to be gained. I'll give you a personal, for instance, of from experiences of mine recently. The firm in question received weekly instructions for around 1,800 legal aid matters per week, all of one specific work type. The opportunity was there to take on more matters, but 1,800 was all that they could manage given their current resources and working practices. Legal aid paid about 600, just over £600 per matter, and it took a fee earner on average 1.5 days to complete that matter. So therefore, a fee earner was generating just £400 in fees per day. What we did was we designed and developed a workflow for this work type, which incidentally meant a single fee earner could then monitor the work of a cluster of much lower paid case handlers. And that's something in itself which improved profitability. But just leaving that completely aside, the workflow meant that a case handler could now complete 1.5 matters in a day, thus generating £900 per day in fees. That's a massive improvement in both in efficiency and obviously flowing through into profit. So generally, so long as a firm has the right case management system in place, designing and developing new workflows is a relatively cheap and simple task. Based on my own observations, I believe currently firms have hardly scratched the surface in terms of leveraging the power of workflows. And therefore, I fully expect this to be an area that the successful law firm of the future will need to exploit further. And then the final area there of efficiencies, which is client engagement. And obviously, in the new normal we find ourselves post-COVID, the use of email remains a major method for firms to interface with clients. I mean, email's not going away. However, the exponential growth in the use of Microsoft Teams provides an opportunity for far more personal and sensitive touch style of client engagement. For instance, firms should be considering offering specific matter-based team sites, perhaps to clients to aid and enhance communications. I'm not advocating that firms should stop storing relevant documents and emails in the document management system. On the contrary, but what I am advocating is the use of Teams to add a complementary layer to a firm's style of client engagement. In addition, the use of Teams along with Zoom and such like, I focus on Teams, but of course there's other products. Using those style of products to enable remote meetings to take place is clearly something that is here to stay. It's avoiding wasting time and money on everyone's part travelling to meet face to face, and it's now accepted an accepted form of client engagement, not just in the legal industry but everywhere. Even the Queen does it, so it has to be acceptable. Again, it's all about efficiency here. Remote electronic signing of documents via DocuSign and such like is again an example of an efficiency that's here to stay and must be exploited to further to become a core strategy of the law firm of the future. Things like checks as another example, they need to be looked into and obviated. They're hugely inefficient payment method, and their time has come. I won't say any more about that, but we do need to get rid of the use of checks. Extended use of portals is another area of efficiency. I think that, in the way that we touch points with clients. Not only using portals to enable the client to access matter-related documents and as a means of keeping in touch with matter progress, but also encourage clients to become self-servicing. For instance, filling forms to provide their own details about themselves and their matters, which can then be uploaded to the PMS, etc., or case management system. Let's try and get the client to do the work for us. Again, all about becoming more efficient. Core habits are changing, and there's much more that can be done remotely these days. And the successful law firm of the future will definitely be one that exploits this to the maximum. Don't go to court unless it's absolutely necessary, and reduce the number of touch points with the court as far as possible. Reliance on the paper file is another area. I mean, it's dramatically changed, and that leads to an increased reliance on the document management system. And the law firm of the future will for sure have a well-designed state-of-the-art document management system in place that's as easy to use as possible, highly integrated with all other systems, PMS, case, etc., feature-rich, and with full functionality available on any device to cater for the roving and remote access demands that we find in this post-COVID world. I could go on, and no doubt there's many more areas that might be explored in terms of creating efficiencies. But hopefully I've got the message across in that delivering excellent levels of service to clients is as much about being efficient, easy to engage with and easy to do business with, as it is about lawyering and what we do. And the successful law from the future will be one that has all of these assets in their repertoire. Okay, let's press on and move on to talk about artificial intelligence. And look, I know people have been talking about artificial intelligence, AI, for donkey's years now, and I'm completely aware of the fact that the take up to date has been limited in extreme in law firms. But in life in general, AI is all around us, and we rely on sat-nav, for example, to get us from A to B. I mean, crikey, even AI will soon drive the car from A to B for us. It's AI that delivers the results when we search the internet. Social media uses AI to control content. I mean, we might argue that it doesn't control it very well, but that's what they use, etc., etc. It's everywhere. And whilst the take-up in legal has been slow, experts both within the legal industry and in the world of technology in general all agree that AI is a massive part to play going forward. I'm not going to spend too much time on the subject today, other than to say that it costs nothing for a firm to take a careful look at products that are available and just evaluate for themselves whether and when it's relevant to make an investment. But what I will do is just illustrate the potential of AI based on one small personal experience of mine, which was just prior to joining Nasstar. I was involved with a relatively small firm, about 150 people, and in 2019 that firm picked up a share of a massive piece of litigation being handled by a Magic Circle firm acting for a FTSE 100 client that was facing a contractual dispute with a competitor. There were several 100,000 contracts in question, and the Magic Circle firm was able to subcontract an initial review of those documents to the smaller firm that I was engaged with. And it was their task then to use AI to sift out those contracts that form the basis of the dispute, based on the presence of certain definable criteria within the body of the contracts. Once having whittled the hundreds of thousands of documents down into a few thousand documents using AI, that smaller firm was then able to manually comment on each and deliver a meaningful report at a price and in a timescale that just would not have been possible without the use of AI. Naturally, the end client that concerned here was incredibly happy with the quick and efficient result and the service provided, and both firms in question made good profits from the exercise. I think the point here is, as I say, look at AI for yourselves. Don't ignore it. Don't dig your head in the sand and hope it will go away. Consider it with an open mind and see where it can benefit your business. For sure, AI will become increasingly ingrained in working practices for the successful law firm of the future. Okay, let's move on to my final subject and talk about collaboration. how can lawyers collaborate more effectively, both within their practice and outwardly with their clients? And how can teams of people work more efficiently together when they're geographically spread far and wide, you know, as we find ourselves these days? And I've already touched on some of the answers. I won't go back and labour the points, but we've spoken about workflows, for example, enabling solicitors to oversee a team of case handlers as matters are progressed. They can be geographically spread and collaboratively working. The use of Teams allows people to communicate effectively, even when they're, you know, we're not in the same location. It's completely agnostic as far as location is concerned, of course. And it helps because we're not batting emails backwards and forwards. Instead, you know, a short, sharp, effective video meeting can go a long, long way and, you know, literally cut out hundreds of emails. The use of we've also mentioned the use of client-centric portals, allowing the client to be kept up to date with matter progress, and, you know, for where documents can be shared, etc. But these portals also provide an opportunity for clients, you know, as I say, to update contact and matter-related information, which means less work for the law firm and greater accuracy of data, working collaboratively with the client. All of those are examples of collaborative working, and all of those are areas that we can expand. But the potential for collaboration extends beyond this. For example, firms should be considering the use of modern telephony systems that not only allow the client to seamlessly reach the lawyer regardless of his or her location, but can also be integrated into the PMS system, both to enable click-to-call functionality, as well as alerting the lawyer to the identity of the incoming caller, and instantly, for example, and automatically providing relevant pop-up information, such as the last touch point from a CRM perspective, current level of exposure with that client, date and value of last bill. After all, there's never a better time to ask a client to settle their account than when a client is seeking further assistance. And in terms of fundamental IT infrastructure being used by law firms, here at Nasstar, we've certainly witnessed the power of the virtual desktop during lockdown, and, you know, the value it adds to collaboration. Firms have really benefited from having just a handful of clearly defined and appetite desktop images, and perhaps one for partners, one for solicitors, one for admin support, etc., as opposed to everyone working in, you know, a different environment, or even worse, everybody having everything. Not only does the you know, virtual desktop aid collaboration by the virtue of the fact that everyone is working on the same page, but it also lessens the liability for end users, now out of sight and out of mind, working from home, going off piste and finding unsupported solutions for themselves. This sort of activity, which the buzzword I think is shadow IT, has become a real issue since lockdown for firms. They've just not controlled things in the right way. A recent survey of UK lawyers indicated that 86% or more would like to continue working from home, and on average they were seeking to doing, you know, they wanted to do it for at least 2 days a week. And that really shines a light on how important it is to work together collaboratively with a controlled desktop, a controlled user experience, and that's, you know, it's a fundamental plank towards making that happen. So I've sort of covered the ground I wanted to cover, really, but just to sum up what I've discussed, you know, the winning law firm of the future will be one that makes itself as resilient as possible to cyber attacks. They're coming for us, and we have to do all we can to protect ourselves. We need to recognise that client service is just as much about you know, how a law firm does things as it is to what it does. So it needs to be as efficient as possible. We've got to find ways to embrace AI, and we've got to collaborate as effectively as possible. Well, thanks everyone for giving up your time this morning. I do hope I've given you some food for thought. At Nasstar, we'd be delighted to discuss these matters with you on a one-to-one basis. But for now, does anybody have any questions? Okay. So the question is, where should a law firm start when looking to improve its security? Well, I mean, security is an incredibly complex subject, and it's become more complex as the criminals. As I hope I got the message over. As the criminals they get more proficient, the dangers increase, and the subject matter extends. I think the starting point is to consider it in the way that the police advise you in trying to prevent your home from burglary, and they advise you to do that on two levels. The first is physical security, keep the bad guys out, and then the second level is containment. So when they're in, limit the damage that they can cause you. So keeping them out is all about, it's the stuff we know about, good locks on the doors and windows and that type of thing. And containment in a house burglary is making sure you haven't left, the car keys on the side, and the your wallet and your cash on the side, your passports are hidden away, etc., etc. So when the bad guys are in, don't let them find what they're looking for very easily. And the same really applies with cybersecurity. It's two levels. It's keeping them out, and then once accepting that the chances are they will get in at some point, and once they're in, containment. And I think in my experience, firms often invest in we've all been used to antivirus and sensible things protecting our servers and all that sort of stuff to keep the bad guys out, but we've not really focused as much as we should have done on containment. So once they're in, and I think that's an area which needs to be looked at in much more detail. So here at Nasstar we offer security audits. And you can't get there's no point asking your existing IT provider or your internal IT team to conduct an audit. It's like auditing your own accounts. You need a third party, different eyes to come along and have a look at it. And we'd love to do that. We're incredibly proficient at, the team here is incredibly proficient at cybersecurity and the subject in its completeness, and they would carry out a full and proper audit for you. So I think that's the way to think about it, and that's the starting point, as I say, is to get that audit in place, fresh eyes to give you a report. Does that help? Okay, any more questions? Okay, so the question is, what actions can I put in place now to improve client collaboration? Now, when you boil it down, collaboration really what it means is retaining your existing clients and growing new ones. That's what we're always trying to do. We just we don't want to lose clients, and we want to gain new ones as much as possible. And there's really no point in pouring new clients into the top of a funnel if they're just running out the bottom. And if you think about collaboration in those terms, you think about improving your working practices. What you really want to try and do is to ingrain your firm, your working practices, your lawyers into their business as deeply as possible, and make it really hard for the client to go elsewhere. And if you turn those thoughts into an action plan, that plan will likely breed ideas for collaboration. It will shine a light on the things that you can do to collaborate with your clients. It will give rise to it. So I think that's the way to look at it. Think about what can we do to retain our clients? How can we get in their business? How can we make it so hard that all they see is our firm, and the difficulty of moving away from us would be such that they'd think, no, it's too hard, we'll stay with them. I think that's what collaboration is all about, really. Any further questions? Okay, so I'll probably make this the last question, actually, but So I can see we're very close to time here. But anyway, the question is, have we got any tips on retaining or attracting staff? Well, actually, this is something that we're actually thinking about a future webinar, because attracting and retaining staff is incredibly costly and difficult. You really don't want to be losing key staff and especially partners that tend to take client portfolios with them. It can be incredibly costly, and of course, every firm is competing for the same resources. And retaining and attracting staff is often, well, and much of it is nothing to do with IT. It's all about firm culture, rewards, inclusiveness, well-being, support, and all those types of things, the human side of stuff. But as far as IT is concerned, it's really what you want is IT that works and is reliable and appropriate. You want IT to help and not hinder people when they're trying to do their jobs. Now, here at Nasstar, we can't control the case or the PMS software that's being used, but we can control things like Office, Teams, system access, etc. The common parts of a firm's IT applications and infrastructure, and wrapping all of that into a virtual desktop that delivers consistency and reliability across multiple devices, multiple locations, definitely helps to remove IT as a bugbear. What you don't want is poor IT to be the straw that broke the camel's back, that caused someone to jump ship. So the biggest tip I can give you for as far as IT is concerned, in terms of retaining staff, is to make IT as reliable and as consistent as possible. Again, here at Nasstar, we'd be delighted to talk with any of you on a one-to-one basis about how we can assist with these matters. But my email address, colin.morris@nasstar.com, or you can call me on 0844 447 4433. And I look forward to talking to you all again in the future. Thanks again very much for your time. Bye-bye.